Hello, this is Dr. Mailer with a brief overview of Chapter 1, Renaissance Men, from our text, The Scientist by John Gribbin. The first few chapters are called Out of the Dark Ages. Now, the Dark Ages extended from about 0 CE to about 1500. And one of the first points that the author makes is that a person, let's say, was born in 700 CE and lived or was somehow reborn back in 1200 CE, there wouldn't be much of a change. In the Dark Ages, not a lot changed. That 500-year span from 700 to 1200 CE, really a lot didn't change. But if a person had been born in 1500 and then came back in 2000 CE, the difference was unbelievable. And that huge difference was one reason: science. Human beings in the 1500s and the 1600s started to practice science the way we practice it today. And what this text is going to be about are the people that really made that science. The first person that he focuses on is Copernicus. Copernicus was a Polish philosopher, scientist. In the days before the 1800s, we really didn't refer or use the word scientist. We used the word natural philosopher, or just philosopher for short. Copernicus was one of the first, and Copernicus, as many of us know, was the first to say, I don't think the way the universe that we know is set up the way it's been accepted. Before Copernicus, this is what everybody thought. Everybody thought that the Earth was in the center of the universe. Take a look at this diagram in blue on the left, and you'll see the Earth with the moon circling, and then just outside it was Mercury also circling in a perfect circle. People in those days believed that human beings were imperfect, but everything outside of the Earth was perfect, so they had to be circling or orbiting or revolving or rotating in a perfect circle. And as you can see, the sun also was posited to go around the Earth, and then Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. Why those planets? Because those were the planets that we could see with our naked eye. The sphere of the stars was a little puzzling to those people that thought about it, but they thought there was this giant sphere that went around, and that's where the stars were. If you look to the diagram to the right, that geocentric theory, that's kind of another way of looking at it. But there were a couple people who played a role in what Copernicus was thinking, and this was the start of the evidence that Copernicus needed, but he never had that evidence in his lifetime. This was a father and son team from England. The father was Leonard Digges, and Leonard Digges practiced measuring in triangulation using an instrument called a theodolite, and you'll read about that in the chapter. His son, Thomas Digges, was the first to really agree solidly with Copernicus. This diagram is from one of his books. And he also was the first to say that the universe is infinite, that it goes on forever and ever. Now, he didn't have it completely right because he thought the stars were fixed, but he did have the center. The center would be the place of the sun. Another person you'll read about is a man by the name of Giordano Bruno. And there's a lot of myth and misinformation about Bruno. Everyone thought that he was crucified as an advocate of Galileo. Now notice we haven't even talked much about Galileo, and your chapter doesn't talk about him too much. That comes a little bit later in the book. But one of the things this first chapter does is it talks about why he really was executed by the church. And I think you'll find that story interesting. Copernicus published a book called De Revolutione, and I'd like you to know there are a number of books that I would like you to know, and that's one of them. Know that Copernicus's breakthrough book, the book where he placed the sun at the center and with the planets orbiting around the sun, was called De Revolutione. And this is the first cover from the book, and I have it circled so that you can see the title and his name. Now, these books were written in Latin. That's why it looks like it's not quite English. This first chapter talks about two things. It talks about the astronomers, but it also talks about the scientists who started making headway into how the human body worked. And really, before the 1500s, we were filled with a lot of myth and superstition about the human body. And Vesalius, Andreas Vesalius, was a surgeon, a dissector, and a grave robber because he was the first to base his observations on experience, on empirical knowledge. There's a nice lithograph of him here from Fine Art America. Here's a picture of some of the tools that he used, pretty grisly lot of the tools and instruments that he used to do his dissection. And as you can see, he was one of the first people to take a look at the brain with the bone removed so we could see the brain casing. This is a sketch from his book. This is a book which talks about the liver being the central part and the distribution of blood. They didn't have it quite right. Another person that helped out learning about the human body was Gabriello Fallopio. Some of you guys may remember from biology, you've learned about the fallopian tubes. Well, Gabriello was an anatomist and a physician. He describes the tubes leading to the uterus from the ovary, and they are still named to this day fallopian tubes. One of the breakthrough books of this time period was written by William Harvey, a Brit. William Harvey wrote De Motu Cordis, otherwise known as on the motion of the heart and blood. He was the first scientist to realize that blood circulated throughout the body. And he performed some really, really fascinating experiments. This diagram here with the ligature on the left-hand side of the arm that's grasping that pole. There's a great short reading in Wikipedia on William Harvey on this particular experiment if you would like to look into it. I highly recommend it. Then at the end, we have a famous picture of Copernicus in conversation with God. And it was Copernicus that really was the theoretician that said, the sun is in the center of our solar system. Now, in those days, they would talk about the entire universe, but he was saying in front of the solar system, and this is a very dramatic picture. Okay, the scientists that I'd like you to focus on for this reading, because there are lots of other names in there, but the 6 scientists that I'd like you to focus on are Copernicus, Thomas Digges, Giordano Bruno, Andreas Vesalius, Gabriello Fallopio, and William Harvey. What William Harvey did was very, very important on discovering that blood circulated through the body. And how he discovered it was really, really fascinating. They talk a little bit about it in the book, but if you want to read just a few paragraphs in Wikipedia, I think it's in about the middle of his biography page. It's really, really well done. Okay, that ends our short overview of Chapter 1. Remember that the questions on the midterm will only be on the scientists from this chapter. Good luck, and go on to reading Chapter 2.